April 14, 1943. North Atlantic, approximately 400 nautical miles southwest of Iceland. The deck of HMS Sunflower pitched violently as another wave crashed over her bow, sending freezing spray across the forward weapons mount. Petty Officer James Mitchell braced himself against the Hedgehog launcher, watching 24 stubby projectiles arranged in rows like a grotesque mechanical garden. Each mortar bomb weighed 32 pounds and waited in silence, aimed not at distant targets on the horizon, but at the invisible death lurking somewhere in the black water ahead. The ASDIC operator below had called out a contact 3 minutes earlier. Range closing, bearing steady. Somewhere beneath the storm-tossed surface, a German U-boat commander believed he was safe, protected by the ocean's embrace, confident that the Corvette's depth charges would pass harmlessly overhead if he simply dove deep enough and stayed quiet. What that commander could not know, what no German submariner had yet fully comprehended, was that the weapons system Mitchell now prepared to fire represented a fundamental transformation in anti-submarine warfare, not through increased explosive power or extended range, but through a deceptively simple innovation that turned hunter-killer tactics from approximation into precision. The Hedgehog eliminated the blind spot that had protected submarines for generations. Traditional depth charge attacks required a ship to pass directly over a submarine's estimated position before releasing charges set to explode at predetermined depths. This meant losing ASDIC contact at the critical moment of attack, as the sound-ranging equipment could not see beneath the ship's hull. Submarine commanders had learned to exploit these final seconds of blindness, changing course or depth after the attacking ship lost contact, ensuring depth charges exploded harmlessly in water they had already vacated. Mitchell's weapon changed everything. The Hedgehog fired ahead of the ship, launching its pattern of contact-fused bombs 200 yards forward, while ASDIC maintained continuous tracking. If the operator called corrections, the captain could maneuver. If the submarine attempted evasion, the ASDC tracked it. And if those stubby mortars found their target, only one needed to strike hull plating for the 35-pound Torpex warhead to detonate. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The thunder of compressed air and cordite propellant erupted across Sunflower's foredeck as all 24 projectiles launched simultaneously, arcing forward into the grey dawn. Mitchell watched them fall, spreading into an elliptical pattern approximately 120 feet long by 40 feet wide, designed to bracket a submarine's length. 24 splashes marked their water entry. Then silence, broken only by the Corvette's engines and the wind's howl. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Nothing happened. But absence of explosion meant nothing with Hedgehog. The contact-fused bombs detonated only on impact with a solid object. If they struck nothing, they sank harmlessly to the ocean floor, their fuses inert. This was Hedgehog's second revolutionary feature. Depth charges exploded whether they hit anything or not, their timed fuses detonating at preset depths regardless of target presence. This created massive underwater shock waves that damaged ASDIC equipment and forced attacking ships to lose contact, waiting for the water to settle before regaining targeting information. Multiple attacks required repeated approaches, each one giving the submarine commander opportunities to escape. Hedgehog's silence confirmed a miss, but preserved ASDIC contact and allowed immediate re-attack without waiting for underwater turbulence to dissipate. Sunflower's ASDIC operator maintained his contact, calling range and bearing updates to the bridge. The captain ordered another attack run. Mitchell and his crew reloaded the launcher from the ready ammunition stored below, a process taking approximately 4 minutes with a well-trained team. The second salvo fired. Again, the projectiles arced forward, spreading into their lethal pattern. 30 seconds. 1 minute. Then the sea erupted. A single massive detonation sent a column of water and debris skyward, followed immediately by the distinctive rumbling crack of a pressure hull collapsing. Secondary explosions followed as compressed air flasks ruptured and diesel fuel ignited. Within 90 seconds, the surface bloomed with oil, debris, and the few pieces of human remains that marked U-635's grave. 44 German sailors died in that instant, their boat broken by a single 32-pound bomb that had fallen silently through 200 feet of water to strike precisely where British ASDIC had tracked it. The transformation from traditional depth-charge warfare to hedgehog-enabled precision killing had begun years earlier, emerging not from naval strategists or weapons designers, but from the desperate innovation of British scientists and engineers watching their nation's merchant fleet being systematically destroyed. In 1940 and early 1941, German U-boats were winning the Battle of the Atlantic through simple arithmetic. British shipyards could not replace merchant vessels faster than submarines sank them. The monthly tonnage calculations told an increasingly grim story. October 1940 saw 443,000 tons of Allied shipping sent to the bottom. November brought 520,000 tons lost. In the single month of March 1941, submarines and surface raiders combined to sink 627,000 tons. Britain's imported supplies, everything from food to fuel to munitions, arrived aboard merchant ships crossing an ocean that German submarines dominated. The mathematical certainty of British starvation and economic collapse became simply a matter of time unless the exchange rate changed dramatically. Anti-submarine warfare in early 1941 remained fundamentally unchanged from World War I. Ships detected submarines using ASDIC, the British acronym for what Americans called sonar, sound-ranging equipment that transmitted ultrasonic pulses and listened for echoes from submerged objects. When ASDIC detected a submarine, the hunting ship maneuvered to pass directly over the estimated position, releasing depth charges set to explode at the depth where the submarine was believed to be operating. Depth charges were effective weapons when they exploded close enough to a submarine's pressure hull. The 300-pound Torpex-filled canisters created shock waves that could crack hull plating, rupture internal equipment, or simply overwhelm a boat's structural integrity through accumulated damage. But getting close enough required solving a problem that seemed insurmountable. ASDIC could not see beneath the attacking ship's hull. The transducer that transmitted and received sound pulses was mounted on the ship's bottom, pointing forward and downward at an angle. As the range to target decreased during an attack approach, the geometry of sound transmission meant the ASD beam passed over the submarine when the range closed to approximately 200 yards. From that point until passing well beyond the target, the attacking ship was blind, navigating by dead reckoning and hoping the submarine maintained its last known course and depth. Submarine commanders quickly learned to exploit this blind spot. Standard evasion doctrine called for maintaining steady course and depth while the attacker had ASDIC contact, then immediately changing both when the ping frequency changed, indicating the submarine had entered the attacker's blind zone. A turn of 30 degrees and a depth, change of 50 feet, executed in the critical seconds when the surface ship could no longer track, meant depth charges exploded harmlessly in water. The submarine had vacated 30 seconds earlier. The statistics reflected this fundamental tactical advantage. In 1941, British anti-submarine forces made hundreds of attacks on confirmed submarine contacts. The vast majority resulted in the submarine escaping without serious damage. Of the approximately 30 German U-boats actually sunk in 1941 by all causes, only 9 were confirmed destroyed by depth charge attacks. The exchange rate heavily favoured the submarine. Admiral Sir Percy Noble, Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches Command, the organisation responsible for protecting Atlantic convoys, watched these statistics with growing alarm. His headquarters in Liverpool maintained detailed analysis of every convoy battle, every submarine contact, every attack made by escort vessels. The patterns emerging from this data painted a clear picture. British escorts needed weeks of searching to find a submarine. Having found one, they needed multiple attacks to achieve a kill, if they succeeded at all. Meanwhile, a single submarine, once positioned within attacking range of a convoy, could sink multiple merchant ships before escorts could even locate it, much less destroy it. The mathematics indicated Britain would lose the Battle of the Atlantic unless escort effectiveness improved dramatically. The solution emerged from the Admiralty's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, an organisation with perhaps the most British bureaucratic title imaginable for what was essentially a group of brilliant engineers and scientists given freedom to explore unconventional weapons concepts. The DMWD had been established in September 1939 under the direction of Lieutenant Commander Charles Goodave, a Canadian-born scientist who approached naval warfare with refreshing disregard for traditional thinking. Goodave assembled a team that included mathematicians, physicists, chemists, and engineers who would eventually develop some of Britain's most effective weapons systems, including the Hedgehog, the Squid anti-submarine mortar, the plastic armour used in landing craft, and numerous other innovations. The fundamental insight that led to Hedgehog came from analysing the geometry of depth charge attacks. If the primary problem was losing contact during the final approach, the solution was obvious in principle, though enormously challenging in execution. Fire the weapon ahead of the ship, maintaining ASDIC contact throughout the attack, and use contact fuses instead of depth settings to ensure explosions only occurred when actually striking the target. This concept was not entirely new. The Royal Navy had experimented with ahead-throwing weapons in World War I, and some early ASDIC-equipped ships carried primitive ahead-firing mortars. But previous designs had proven unreliable, inaccurate, or simply too weak to damage submarines effectively. What made the DMWD's approach different was systematic engineering focused on creating a practical, reliable, production-ready weapon system that could be manufactured in quantity and installed on existing escort vessels without extensive modification. The weapon that emerged from this development program received the designation Projector Anti-Submarine Merc 10, though it would become universally known by its operational code name Hedgehog. The name derived from the visual appearance of its 24 projectiles, arranged in 6 rows of 4 on the launch cradle, supposedly resembling the spines of a hedgehog, though this required considerable imagination. More likely, the name was simply memorable and suitably British in its understated description of a lethal weapons system. The Hedgehog's design reflected brilliant simplicity combined with sophisticated engineering. 24 spigot mortars, each, consisting of a steel rod welded to a base plate, protruded from the launch cradle. The projectile itself was a streamlined bomb with a hollow tail section that fitted over the spigot. When fired, a small charge in the spigot's base drove the projectile forward and upward at approximately 60 feet per second. The projectiles left the launcher at intervals of 60 milliseconds, so rapid that crews perceived it as simultaneous firing. The launch cradle could be tilted to adjust range, with typical combat settings placing the impact pattern approximately 200 yards ahead of the ship. Each projectile weighed 32 pounds, of which 35 pounds consisted of Torpex explosive, significantly more powerful than TNT. The contact fuse mounted in the nose required approximately 40 pounds of striking force to trigger detonation, enough to prevent premature triggering from wave action or underwater pressure changes, but ensuring reliable detonation when striking a submarine's hull plating. The pattern these 24 projectiles created underwater was carefully calculated through extensive testing. At typical combat range, they formed an ellipse approximately 120 feet long and 40 feet wide. A submarine's pressure hull was typically 20 to 25 feet in diameter and 150 to 250 feet long. The mathematics indicated reasonable probability of at least one hit, provided the ASDIC operator correctly estimated target position and the captain properly aimed the ship during the firing pass. The first operational Hedgehog installation went to sea aboard HMS Westcott, a V-class destroyer, in January 1942. Initial results were disappointing, not because the weapon system failed, but because the tactical doctrine for its employment remained undeveloped. Crews accustomed to depth charge attacks struggled to adapt to Hedgehog's requirements. Traditional depth charge doctrine emphasized attacking aggressively, closing range quickly, and saturating the target area with multiple explosive patterns. Hedgehog demanded patience, precise ASDIC tracking, and carefully aimed single attacks. The learning curve was steep and measured in missed opportunities. HMS Westcott made her first Hedgehog attack on March 7, 1942, against a submarine contact in the western approaches. The attack missed, So did the second attack 3 days later, and the third, fourth, and fifth attacks over the following month. Crews began questioning whether this new weapon represented genuine improvement or simply another failed innovation from shore-based theorists who didn't understand real combat conditions. The skepticism extended beyond individual ship crews to commanding officers and staff planners who reviewed combat reports. Some senior officers argued for removing Hedgehog systems and returning to proven depth charge tactics. Others noted that while Hedgehog hadn't yet achieved kills, neither had it prevented ships from continuing to employ traditional weapons. The debate continued through spring 1942, while more escorts received Hedgehog installations and crews gained experience with the weapon's unique characteristics. The breakthrough came on July 11, 1942, when HMS Orchis, a Flower-class corvette, made contact with a submarine while escorting convoy OS-33 south of Ireland. Lieutenant Commander R.W. commanded Orchis, and he had trained his crew extensively in Hedgehog tactics during workup exercises. When his ASDIC operator reported a firm contact, Kima maneuvered for a Hedgehog attack with deliberate precision. He maintained ASDIC contact throughout the approach, made course corrections based on the submarine's movements, and fired when range and bearing parameters matched optimal attack conditions. The 24 projectiles arced forward, disappeared into the Atlantic's grey surface, and descended toward U-Boat 538. Kapitänleutnant Wolfgang Rahn, commanding U-538, had detected Orchis's approach through hydrophone contacts and diving planes. He ordered his boat to dive to 250 feet, deeper than most depth charges were set during early war attacks, and initiated a standard evasion maneuver, turning 30 degrees to port while maintaining silent running. This tactic had saved his boat twice before during depth charge attacks. The ASDIC pinging had stopped abruptly as the escort passed overhead, confirming Rahn's assumption that he had entered the blind zone, and his evasion maneuver would carry him clear of the depth charge pattern. Then something struck U-538's pressure hull, just aft of the conning tower with the sound of a massive hammer blow. The 35-pound Torpex warhead detonated on contact, blowing a hole through the pressure hull that measured approximately 2 feet in diameter. Atlantic Ocean at 250 feet depth entered the submarine with the force of a horizontal waterfall, the pressure differential ensuring that nothing could stop or even slow the inrush. Emergency lighting failed immediately, as electrical systems shorted. Men screamed in the darkness as freezing water and released hydraulic oil-filled compartments in seconds. The boat began falling by the stern, her aft torpedo room flooding so rapidly that the 3 men stationed there died without time to even attempt escape. Rahn, in the control room, had perhaps 15 seconds of consciousness to understand what had happened. No depth charge had struck his boat. Something else, something fired ahead of the attacking ship while ASDIC still maintained contact, had found his hull despite his evasion maneuver. Then the water reached him, and U-538 continued her descent into permanent darkness, carrying 45 men to graves that would never be marked. Aboard Orchis, the single massive detonation confirmed what the contact fuse's design promised. Unlike depth charges that exploded whether they hit anything or not, Hedgehog's silence meant a miss, while an explosion meant destruction. There was no need to wait for water turbulence to settle, no requirement for additional attacks to confirm damage. The weapon had either missed entirely or killed the target. The presence of debris, oil, and human remains rising to the surface within minutes provided visual confirmation of what the explosion had already announced. U-538 was destroyed with complete crew loss, the first confirmed Hedgehog kill in combat. News of Orchis's success reached Western Approach's command within hours and initiated immediate reassessment of Hedgehog's potential. Commander Kima's detailed action report provided crucial tactical intelligence about proper employment doctrine. He emphasized the importance of maintaining steady ASDIC contact throughout the approach, making course corrections until the final seconds before firing, and trusting the weapon's contact fuses rather than assuming manual depth settings were necessary. His recommendations formed the basis for revised training programs rolled out to all Hedgehog-equipped vessels over the following months. The U-boat force, meanwhile, remained largely unaware that the rules of anti-submarine warfare had fundamentally changed. U-538's loss was recorded as simply another boat failing to return from patrol. Operational commanders assumed she had been sunk by depth charges, mines, or possibly aircraft attack. No particular significance attached to her disappearance in the vast catalogue of submarine losses that grew longer each month. This intelligence gap, the German Navy's failure to recognize that Allied forces had deployed a weapons system that eliminated the blind spot submarines depended upon for survival, would persist for months and contribute directly to dozens of additional submarine losses. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The production and deployment of Hedgehog systems accelerated through late 1942 and into 1943 as British industry worked to equip escort vessels as rapidly as possible. The weapon's design facilitated relatively straightforward installation on existing ships. Unlike major weapons systems that required extensive structural modifications, Hedgehog could be mounted on the forecastle deck, connected to the ship's electrical system for firing circuits, and supplied with ready ammunition from below-deck magazines. A typical installation took approximately 2 weeks in a properly equipped shipyard, far less time than building new vessels or conducting major armament overhauls. By mid-1943, over 100 Allied escort vessels carried Hedgehog systems, and production continued expanding. The United States Navy, initially skeptical of British ahead-throwing weapons, began installing Hedgehogs on destroyer escorts after observing combat results. American shipyards produced Hedgehogs under license, with some modifications to firing circuits and ammunition handling that reflected different design philosophies but maintained operational compatibility. The ammunition itself represented a production challenge that British and American factories solved through systematic industrial engineering. Each Hedgehog projectile required precision manufacturing to ensure reliable spigot fit, correct ballistic shape for predictable trajectory, and sensitive contact fuses that would trigger on hull impact but not arm prematurely during launch and water entry. The Torpex explosive filling was more powerful than TNT, but also more sensitive to shock and temperature variations, requiring careful quality control during manufacturing. British factories, already operating at maximum capacity, producing bombs, shells, mines, torpedoes, and depth charges, absorbed Hedgehog projectile production into existing explosive manufacturing infrastructure. By mid-1943, monthly production exceeded 10,000 projectiles, sufficient to support operational requirements and build reserve stocks aboard escort vessels and at forward supply bases. American factories added their production capacity beginning in early 1943, ensuring that U.S. Navy escorts could train and operate without depending on British ammunition supplies. The tactical employment of Hedgehog evolved through accumulated combat experience as crews developed techniques for maximizing effectiveness. Early attacks had often failed because operators tried to use Hedgehog the same way they used depth charges, making aggressive high-speed runs that complicated ASDIC tracking. Successful commanders learned that Hedgehog attacks required patience and precise navigation. Optimal technique involved establishing firm ASDIC contact, reducing ship speed to approximately 10 knots to minimize self-noise that interfered with sound ranging, and making steady course corrections to maintain the submarine directly ahead. The final approach required calculating the submarine's position, course, and depth, then timing the launch so projectiles would impact where the submarine would be when they arrived, not where it had been when firing began. This sounds simple in principle but required considerable skill in practice. Submarines did not obligingly maintain steady course and depth during attacks. Skilled commanders maneuvered constantly, changing depth by 10 or 20 feet, altering course by 5 or 10 degrees, attempting to confuse ASDIC tracking and create uncertainty about their actual position. The attacking ship's captain had to anticipate these movements, predict where the submarine would be in the 30 to 40 seconds between firing and projectile impact, and aim accordingly. The best commanders developed almost intuitive sense for submarine behavior, reading subtle changes in ASDIC echo characteristics that indicated depth changes or course alterations, and adjusting their attacks in response. German submarine commanders, meanwhile, slowly began recognizing that something had changed in Allied anti-submarine tactics. Reports from boats that survived attacks increasingly mentioned explosions that seemed to occur at the moment of ASDIC contact loss, suggesting weapons fired ahead of the attacking ship rather than dropped astern in traditional depth charge patterns. But the intelligence assessment process was slow, and many reports were lost when boats were sunk before filing detailed action accounts. The U-boat force continued operating under tactical doctrines developed against depth charge attacks, doctrines that emphasized diving deep and maneuvering during the attacker's blind period. These tactics, which had proven effective against depth charges, actually increased vulnerability to Hedgehog attacks by encouraging submarines to remain in the predictable envelope of ASDIC tracking while maneuvering within the weapon's impact pattern. The statistical impact of Hedgehog deployment became measurable through 1943. Ships equipped with Hedgehog achieved submarine kills at rates significantly higher than vessels relying solely on depth charges. The Royal Navy's operational research sections, which maintained detailed statistical analysis of all anti-submarine operations, documented this effectiveness through rigorous data collection. By the end of 1943, Hedgehog-equipped ships had made approximately 260 attacks and achieved 47 confirmed kills, representing an 18% success rate. Traditional depth charge attacks during the same period showed success rates below 5%. The difference was dramatic and statistically significant. Each Hedgehog attack consumed 24 projectiles. Each successful depth charge attack typically consumed 150 to 300 depth charges spread across multiple attack runs. The ammunition efficiency ratio favored Hedgehog by more than 10 to 1. The explosive power comparison was equally revealing. 24 Hedgehog projectiles contained a total of approximately 60 pounds of Torpex. A single depth charge contained 300 pounds, but the depth charges exploded whether they hit anything or not, dissipating their energy through the water column, while Hedgehog projectiles only exploded on direct hull contact, concentrating their full energy against the submarine's structure. The operational impact extended beyond simple kill statistics. Hedgehog attacks didn't create the massive underwater turbulence that depth charges produced. This meant ASDIC remained effective immediately after an attack, allowing ships to maintain contact and make follow-up attacks within minutes rather than waiting for water conditions to settle. In convoy battles where multiple submarines might be operating simultaneously, this capability to rapidly re-engage or switch to new targets provided crucial tactical flexibility. Escort commanders who might previously have spent hours prosecuting a single submarine contact could now make several attacks, confirm kills or misses quickly, and move on to protect their convoy against additional threats. The German response to Hedgehog, once its existence and capabilities became understood through intelligence analysis and captured documents, followed the pattern of technological catch-up that characterized much of Germany's war effort. Engineers at the German naval weapons development facilities examined reports of ahead-throwing weapons and began designing countermeasures and equivalent systems. The proposed German ahead-throwing mortar, designated WWII, reached prototype stage in 1944. It was technically sophisticated, featuring larger projectiles with improved range and explosive power compared to Hedgehog. But like many German weapons of the late war period, the WWII never reached production, much less operational deployment. Material shortages, production priorities favoring other weapons, and the general collapse of German industrial capacity under Allied bombing meant that German submarines faced Hedgehog attacks without effective countermeasures throughout the remainder of the war. German submarine construction doctrine also responded to the growing effectiveness of Allied anti-submarine weapons, including Hedgehog, by emphasizing deeper diving depths and stronger pressure hulls. The Type 21 U-boat, Germany's revolutionary late-war submarine design, featured substantially increased diving depth capability, reaching test depths of 750 feet compared to approximately 500 feet for earlier types. This deeper operating envelope would theoretically have allowed Type 21 boats to dive below the effective depth range of many Allied weapons, but only 2 Type 21 submarines completed operational patrols before Germany's surrender, and neither encountered Hedgehog attacks. The technological race between submarine capabilities and anti-submarine weapons had been won decisively by Allied industrial capacity and deployed innovation rather than by German engineering sophistication remaining in development. Laboratories. The human experience of Hedgehog attacks, from both sides of the engagement, reveals the psychological dimension of this weapons revolution. Allied escort crews who had spent months making depth-charge attacks that almost never achieved confirmed kills found Hedgehog both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because the weapon's silence after a miss removed the psychological comfort of explosions that at least suggested aggressive action against an enemy. Depth charges always exploded, providing visceral evidence of attack even if they missed. Hedgehog's silence after firing, the waiting for either definitive explosion or nothing, created tension that crews found unsettling. But successful attacks, marked by the unmistakable detonation and the debris field that followed, provided absolute confirmation of enemy destruction that depth charges rarely offered. This psychological certainty, knowing definitively that a submarine had been killed rather than merely driven off or possibly damaged, had profound effects on crew morale and combat effectiveness. For German submarine crews, the psychological impact was wholly negative. The traditional tactical advantage of blind period exploitation, which had provided a sense of control and survivability during depth-charge attacks, ceased to exist. Submarine commanders who executed textbook evasion maneuvers found themselves being hit by weapons that should have missed. The fundamental assumption that diving deep and maneuvering during the attacker's final approach would ensure survival was proven false by boats that were destroyed despite following doctrine perfectly. This created a psychological crisis among submarine crews, who increasingly recognized that they faced weapons against which their training and tactics provided no reliable defense. The casualty statistics reflected this grim reality. By 1944, the U-boat force was experiencing losses that approached 75% of operational boats. Many factors contributed to these catastrophic casualties, including improved Allied air coverage, better radar, more effective depth charges, and vastly increased numbers of escort vessels. But Hedgehog represented a qualitative change, not merely quantitative improvement. It eliminated a tactical vulnerability that submarines had exploited since the invention of ASDIC, transforming anti-submarine warfare from approximate area bombardment into precision engagement. The Battle of the Atlantic, the prolonged campaign for control of the sea lanes connecting North America to Britain, reached its decisive turning point in May 1943. That month, German submarines suffered unprecedented losses, 41 boats destroyed, while Allied merchant ship losses declined dramatically. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, commanding the U-boat force, made the strategic decision to withdraw submarines from the North Atlantic convoy routes, effectively conceding defeat in the campaign that had nearly strangled Britain. Multiple factors drove this decision, but the increasing effectiveness of Allied anti-submarine weapons, including Hedgehog, featured prominently in operational analyses. The exchange rate had shifted decisively against the submarine, where once a single U-boat could sink multiple merchant ships before being driven off, now submarines were being destroyed before achieving any sinkings. The mathematics that had favored Germany in 1940 and 1941 had reversed completely. Production statistics tell part of this story. Britain and the United States together produced merchant shipping at rates that exceeded losses by increasingly wide margins through 1943 and 1944. But production capacity alone did not win the Battle of the Atlantic. The Allies needed to reduce sinking rates below replacement capacity, while simultaneously destroying submarines faster than German shipyards could build them. This required effective anti-submarine weapons that actually killed submarines rather than merely harassing them. Hedgehog, deployed aboard hundreds of escort vessels by mid-1943, provided exactly this capability. Each confirmed Hedgehog kill represented not just a submarine destroyed, but a crew of approximately 50 men lost, men whose training had required years and whose experience was irreplaceable. Germany could build submarines faster than they were sunk, at least through 1944. But training competent crews, particularly experienced commanders who understood submarine warfare's tactical complexities, took years that Germany no longer possessed. The post-war assessment of Hedgehog's effectiveness drew on comprehensive analysis of German records captured after surrender. These documents, including U-boat war diaries, construction records, and loss reports, provided detailed evidence of Hedgehog's impact. Of the approximately 785 German submarines destroyed during World War II, at least 51 were confirmed killed by Hedgehog attacks, representing roughly 6.5% of total losses. This percentage understates Hedgehog's significance because it measures only direct kills without accounting for the weapon's impact on submarine tactics and crew morale. Many submarines damaged by near-miss Hedgehog attacks were subsequently sunk by other weapons, or forced to abort patrols, or arrived in port with crews so psychologically traumatized by the experience that they required extensive rest before returning to operations. The psychological impact of facing weapons against which standard defensive tactics proved ineffective cannot be measured statistically, but appears repeatedly in German war diaries and post-war accounts. Submarine commanders increasingly described feeling hunted rather than being hunters, recognizing that the tactical initiative had shifted permanently to Allied forces. The technological and tactical advantages that U-boats had enjoyed in the war's early years, advantages built on surprise, technical sophistication, and operational daring, had been systematically dismantled by Allied weapons development, industrial production, and tactical innovation. Hedgehog represented one component of this comprehensive defeat of the submarine, but its contribution was significant precisely because it addressed a specific tactical weakness that submarines had exploited with devastating effectiveness. The legacy of Hedgehog extended well beyond World War II, influencing anti-submarine weapons, a development through the Cold War era and into the present day. The fundamental principle of ahead-throwing weapons maintaining continuous target tracking while engaging remained central to anti-submarine doctrine. The British Royal Navy developed improved versions, including the Squid anti-submarine mortar, which entered service in 1943 and featured larger projectiles with depth fuses rather than contact fuses, creating a compromise between Hedgehog's precision and depth charge area effects. The United States Navy developed the weapon Alpha, an ahead-throwing rocket system that operated on similar principles to Hedgehog, but with greater range and explosive power. Modern anti-submarine warfare continues using guided projectiles, torpedoes, and rockets that maintain the Hedgehog principle of engaging submarines without losing sensor contact during the attack. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.